And as far as going to get to Hilchas Tumatara. So, but there's a lot to Stelzachan and the Sicha. Well, just one or two ha'aras to apply. The Rebbe brings a Gemara in the end of Nida. That the Gemara says, Shalu Anshe Alexandria as Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya Shalosh Divrei Buris. The Anshe Alexandria asked Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya three questions that the Gemara describes as Divrei Burus, like foolishness. The three questions, the first question they asked, Ishte Shaloit Mao Shetatame. Lot's wife turned into a Netziv Melach. Does she become Tameh or not? Omar Lahem, so Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya said, Meis Metame vein Netziv Melach Betame. She doesn't become Tameh. It says in the Pasuk, a Meis becomes Tameh, but not a Netziv Melach. A Netziv Melach is not a Meis. The second question they asked, Ben Shunamis Mao Sheyitame. In Tanakh we learn a story about the Ben Shunamis, that Elisha, that he died. Elisha promised he was going to be born, and he was born, and then he died. And Elisha did Tchias HaMeisim. So they had a question after this Tchias HaMeisim, does he have Tumas Mes? So he told them, Meis Mitame ve'in Chai Mitame. It's not a question. Once he's alive, he for sure doesn't have Tumas Mes, because Meis Mitame ve'in Chai Mitame. And the third question he asked them, La'asid Love, when there's Tchias HaMeisim, do the Meisim who come back to life need the Efer Parah? Need the Hazah, Shlishi, Shvi of the Paraduma to become Torah? And he told them two nuschais. Either he said, we'll see when they come back to life, or he said, and the Rebbe explains a few Yesodis. The first Yesod is that even though the Gemara refers to their three questions as Divrei Burus, Burus is emptiness. The Gemara says a Bur is a lower level than an Amaretz. Nevertheless, it's not because they were foolishness. If they were completely foolishness, they wouldn't be quoted in the Gemara. They wouldn't be discussed. They were Divrei Burus because there was some point, that basic point that they were missing. That's the first Akdama. The second Akdama, for the whole lengthy Shaklavataya in the Sicha of all of the different Dakas to Kisvaras and Tumah, the Rebbe says is based on two Yesodis. That for Tumas Mes, there's two criteria. What causes Tumas Mes is number one, Siluk HaChayas. When there was Chayas somewhere and the Chayas is removed, it goes away, that brings about Tumah. And the Siluk HaChayas has to be Siluk Klolos HaChayas, which means the entire Chayas has to be Nistalek. And the Rebbe brings this out from a halacha. If someone has a Eiver V'Abasar HaMeduldalim, if there's a limb that Rahman al-Islam became dead meat, it's not alive anymore, but it's attached to the body. So on the one hand, there was a Siluk HaChayas from this Eiver, but not a complete Siluk HaChayas, because the Eiver is still part of a guf, that in the guf there's Klolos HaChayas. It's not enough of a siluk to bring about Tumas Mes. It has to be complete siluk Klolos HaChayas. The second condition is that the thing that's becoming Tameh, Tumas Mes, has to be a guf mes. The thing from which the Chayas was Nistalek has to be a dead body. And this the Rebbe brings from the Din, that in Nisrafat Shenizbabel Otsuras Tavnise Toher, that it says in the Rambam that if the body got burned, the dead body, to the point that it lost the form of a corpse, of a human corpse, it's no longer tummy. Because it's not a guf mes. To be tummy tumas mes, it has to have siluk HaChayas, and the thing where the Chayas was nostalgic from is a guf mes. With this Akdama, the Rebbe enters a long discussion. Just we're going to get to a few points. So the first Shaila was Ishte Shalit Mao Shetatame. What's the question if Ishte Shalit is Metame? So the Rebbe says you could say, the question is, based on the Hakdama, in order to be Tameh, it has to be a guf mas. We just said, Nisraf Achen is Babel Atzurase Taher. So if it's a Nitziv Melech, it lost the image of a corpse of a human being, then it should be Taher. So what's the Shaila? Says the Rebbe, the Shaila is, what was the type of nest that made Ishtei Shaloi turn into Nitziv Melech? We learn, and the Rebbe brings in a few Sichos in a few places, in Chelek Vav B'Shalach, and in Hashmoi Sicha, a few places, that there's two types of Nisim. In general, there's Nisim that are, I guess you could say, Bechitzenius and Bepnimius. There's Nisim that the Nes actually changes the thing that the Nes happened to. The example of that the Rebbe brings in all these Sichos is Vehine Yodei Mitziras Kasholek. Moshe Rabbeinu put his hand El Chekei by his chest, he took it out, it was Yodei Mitziras Kasholek. Did his hand actually change? Or did the Nes just make his hands look like it was Mitziras, but there was no be'emistic change? Says the Rebbe, over there the hand be'etzem changed. How do you know? Because when he had his hand be shava kibisari, when it was restored, you needed a new Nes to make it be restored. How do you know you needed a new Nes to make it be restored? Because it says, Miruba mida teva mimida piranius, Rashi says, because the second Nes happened faster. If when it came back it wasn't a Nes, it was just taking away the first Nes. I can't compare the two Nisim and the speed of them which they happened, that it's Miruba mida teva mimida piranius. Is a raya that his hand being shava kipsari was also a Nes. That you needed a Nes to be shava kipsari is a raya that the first Nes actually changed the hand. So it's not enough to take away the first Nes, you need a new Nes. A second eifin in Nisim but is that the Nes doesn't completely change the thing. It's a constant Nes to give it the appearance of being something else. The example that the Rebbe brings in all the Sichos is changing the mayim to dam. And this idea says in some other Mefarshim, wasn't the pshat that it be'etzem became dam? It was a constant Nes that made the mayim be like dam. But be'etzem it was mayim. And that's why if a Yid was drinking from the water, he was drinking water. Not because the Nes made it into water for the Yid, but because be'etzem it was water. As long as it wasn't a mitzri and there was no Nes to turn it into dam, it was water. And this by all Nisim you have these two sugin of communities. The Mela Verta Shaila, when the Eibishter changed Ishtei Shaloit into Nitziv Melech, which type of Nes was it? Did she actually become a Nitziv Melech? Or was she a human body that had that a Nes made it seem constantly like a Nitziv Melech? Which would be l'chayra, the second way would be a very, very big chiddush. Because we know le'avid kutshabrichu nisa l'magana. The Ishtei Shalait is a Nes, the Pashtus Ada Yemazeh, right? Everyone who goes to Eretz Yisrael goes to visit the Ishtei Shalait by Yam HaMelech. Two of them, three of them. So one of them is the Ishtei. If it's a Nes that's a constant Nes, Hestos the Eibishter macht a Nes, for what reason? Shaking it. But that was, it's Tut Stadim, the Rebbe said. What's the nafkamina in the Tut Stadim? If you say she actually was transformed, Tanitziv Melech is Nishtakin Guf Mes, then we're missing one of the criteria for Tumah. Mashakin, if you say that the Nes just made it seem like a Nitziv Melech, but be'etzem it's a Guf Mes, so you have the criteria for Tumah, then she should become Tumah. That's what you would be able to learn. Says the Rebbe, the problem with this is, then their shaila wasn't a shaila in Hilchas Tumah V'Tara. Their shaila was a shaila about the Nes of Ishtei Shalait. They asked 3 questions. The other 2 questions are about Tumah V'Tara, right? that have to do with Dinei Tumah V'Tara. It's mistaber that all three questions have to do with Dinei Tumah V'Tara. It's not mistaber that the first question was a side question that has implications about Tumah V'Tara, but the question was about the Eifen of the Nes of Ishtishalei. Therefore, says the Rebbe, the question was also, that's the Hadgasha and the Sicha Oich, like was also a question about Dinei Tumah V'Tara. What's the question about Dinei Tumah V'Tara? So let me tell you what the Rebbe says, and then we'll try to understand it a little bit. First, the shaila is, what is this cause of tumah of siluk haneshama? Is it the etzem siluk haneshama? There's a din that neshama going away creates a metzias of tumah, or siluk haneshama causes the guf to be called a guf mes, but the tumah comes from a guf mes. You need siluk haneshama because we said there's two criteria. But the siluk haneshama is just a hechetimtza, that's what makes it into a guf mes. But tumah comes from a guf mes. B'meila, what's the nafkamina? If I say the first way that siluk haneshama itself causes tumah, so then the Netziv Melech could become Tameh. If you say that siluk haneshama makes it a guf mes, so then it's not a guf mes, it's a Netziv Melech, it can't become Tameh. That's what the Rebbe says, and the Rebbe brings examples from Mitzvahs Milah and Mitzvahs Kisi Adam, maybe the Kisvar is Svarfenzich. The two tzadim that the Rebbe says, first of all, this Chakira seems very hard to understand. What does that mean? If she's a Netziv Melech, even if the Tumah shaft sich von siluk haneshama, even if the Goyrem HaTumah is the act, the removal of the neshama, siluk hachayos, but you still have a condition that you need a guf mes. You established that already. So nisrafach and his balbul tzurase is time. And those two criteria, that's the hagdama klolis for the sicha. That's the premise for the whole sicha. So we're not going away from those two hagdamas, except for one ha'ara that Yeshua was 44. If there's two criteria, so then even if it's siluk haneshama, you still need a guf mes. If she's a Netziv Melech, she's not a guf mes. Elamai, the Rebbe is explaining over here, like it's muchach in the Sicha. According to the Tzad, that the Nes is a Nes that didn't change the Metzias. It's constantly, superficially, externally, bechitzonius, making her like a Netziv Melech. But she is a guf mes. So then what's it telling the two tzadim? Then even if I say that tumah comes from a guf mes, aksedach that she is a guf mes. What's the pshat in this shaila, the new chiddush that the Rebbe says in the shaila? The Rebbe compares it to milah, kisa, adam, but that's to explain the two tzadim. How are we understanding the two tzadim and that it's a nafkamina legabi ishte shalei ma'arshet tatam? Now, the Chayre, the Pshat Muzayin, the Rebbe is saying like this. This is all in the tzad that the Nes is a superficial Nes. That be'etzem she's a guf, there's a Mrs. Loit is there, and there's a Nes that's giving her the tzir of a Netziv Melech constantly. So you have the Tanai of guf mes. And nevertheless, says the Rebbe, they had a shaila, even according to this oifen of the Nes, whether she could become Tameh. And on that, the Rebbe is tailored in these two ways to look at siluk haneshama. Before these two ways, like we said, there's the hakdama klolis, there's the premise for the whole sicha, that for sure, without having the tanai of a guf mes, you can't have tumah. Nisrafa shenizbalbel atzurasei tahar. However, that's a Tanai. Both Siluk HaNeshama and Guf Mes are Tanaim before we get to the new Chakir. Each Tanai could have different ways of how it works and how much of a part it plays in the Din Tumah. If I would learn that Guf Mes is a Tanai, that the criteria, the need to have a Guf Mes is Valdas is a Tanai, on them cancel nicht haben Tumah. Nisraf of his Babel Atsurase took away one of the conditions for Tumah. Weil ich darf Ihnen sagen, that by Ishtei Shaloit, according to this Hasbara in the Ifin Hanes, that the Nes kept her a Guf Mes, so you still have that Tanai. The Tanai was never changed. You have a Tanai of a Guf Mes, because it's Ba'atzam a Guf Mes. If that's a condition for Tumah, so you fulfill the condition. Says the Rebbe now, but now we have to look, what is Siluk Chachayis word? Maybe Guf Mes is not a Tanai. Maybe the whole din of Tumah is that a Guf Mes is the Sibas HaTumah. When Torah says the Parsha of Adam Kiyamus Ba'ayal, the Torah saying that when there's a Guf Mes, that shame Guf Mes is what makes it Tumah. And Siluk HaChayus is the Heichetimtza to give something a label of a Guf Mes. If I say like that even though the Nitziv Melech, the Ishtei Shaloit is Be'etzem a Guf, aber du kannst nicht haben, als sie hat Hashem von a Guf Mes. She's a Guf Be'etzem, but then that's giving it a tzir, giving it now a label of a Nitziv Melech. So if there's a condition of Guf Mes, the being a Guf Mes Be'etzem is enough to fulfill the condition. If the whole Sibas HaTumah is Guf Mes, is it doch nicht kein Metzias von a Guf Mes, it's a Metzias von a Nitziv Melech. That's l'cheira, what you have to be masbir, what the Rebbe is being mechadish in this chakira. That's the first step. But then remains a question. So the Rebbe, when he brings this new chakira, how does Siluk HaChayus Gufa work? Is the Siluk HaChayus a cause for Tumah by itself, or the Siluk HaChayus is merely the Heichet Timtza to be able to define the Guf as a Guf Mes? So when the Rebbe brings the first side, Zi Tumas Mes schafft sich von Etzem Siluk HaNeshama, so the Rebbe says in parentheses, wie me ken l'chayra uplernen von dem, was Ever HaMeduldul is Taher, wie bald as bayem is nicht gewinn Siluk HaChayus, chotsch as is azevi anevim nes. The Rebbe says l'chayra, a raya to this side, and in Ha'ara 38 he says why it's not a raya muchrachas, but there's seemingly a raya to this side that the Siluk HaNeshama itself causes Tumah, because that's why Ever HaMeduldul is not Tumah, because it didn't have Siluk HaNeshama. If Guf Mes causes Tumah, so then the Ever HaMeduldul is a Guf Mes. That's the raya the Rebbe brings. L'chayra, the raya says Dershuni. It's very hard to understand. This that Ever HaMeduldul is not Tamei was the Hagdam, part of the Hagdama close to the Sicha. We knew that because there's two separate conditions. You need Siluk HaNeshama and you need Guf Mes, and it has to be Siluk HaNeshama. In both studim of the Chakira over here, the Rebbe doesn't suggest that you need only Guf Mes or only Siluk HaNeshama. The Rebbe is clear that you need both. The Shaila is Siluk HaNeshama. That condition of Siluk HaNeshama creates Tumah by itself. And Guf Mes is a Tanai Kilo. Or Siluk HaNeshama is what causes the Guf to get that title of a Guf Mes. But for sure you need Siluk HaNeshama. So according to both studim, since by Ever HaMeduldul is nicht gewinnt kein Siluk HaNeshama, so it can't be considered a Guf Mes, no matter how you learn. Whether you learn Guf Mes is the Sibas HaTumah, and Siluk HaNeshama just causes it to be known as a guf mes, or that Siluk HaNeshama causes the tumah and guf mes is the Tanai. And that's how it was pashut in the Akdama to the Sicha, that we brought this din of Avraham Aduldal as part of the Akdama Klolos, with the understanding that there's two separate conditions, and you have to have both conditions, and this is a raya to one of the conditions. How did this suddenly become a raya with the new oifen of explaining the Chakira, or the new Chakira? How did this suddenly become a raya to one of the tzaddim in the Chakira? Very hard to understand. So what we could say, l'cheira yesh leimar, the pshat, the Rebbe is saying is like this. We have two tzaddim. Siluk HaChayis shaftuma, that's one side. And there's a t'nai, it has to be a guf mes, for sure, l'chol hadiyos. Or guf mes shaftuma. And Siluk HaChayis is what makes it a guf mes. According to the second way, you still need Siluk HaChayis. Because without Siluk HaChayis, it won't be a guf mes. That's why I had a question in the parentheses. But now let's add to that. What the Rebbe is saying maybe is, but if I say that the tumah comes from guf mes, and Siluk HaChayis is what makes it a guf mes, what are we saying? That Eiver HaMeduldal, the reason why it's Tahar, is because it didn't have Siluk HaChayis, even though it's definitely a guf mes. What does it mean it didn't have Siluk HaChayis? Because it didn't have Siluk Klolos HaChayis, because it's still connected to the guf, it's part of a guf chay. The Chayis, Kloli of the guf, is still tied to it. But the Chayis Prati of this Eiver is completely nostalgic. So the Rebbe is maybe saying, if I would say that the Siluk HaChayis itself shafted tumah, not the fact that it's a guf mes, so then and in order to create tumah, you need a complete Siluk HaChayis. You need Siluk Klolos HaChayis. So then I would understand, by this Avraham Aduldo, there was no Siluk Klolos HaChayis, V'nishvi, it didn't have the Tanai for tumah. But if I say guf mes makes the tumah, and Siluk HaChayis is what causes it to be a guf mes, then I would have to say, what's the definition of Siluk HaChayis? Since Siluk HaChayis is just a heichetimtza, this is just the means of giving it a name guf mes, of considering it a guf mes. So what's considered Siluk HaChayis? Enough Siluk HaChayis to make it a guf mes. Since the Eiver HaMeduldal is completely a guf mes. And it's a guf mes, why? Because of the Siluk HaChayis. So even though there's an aspect of Chayis that wasn't nostalgic, since there was Chayis that was nostalgic enough to make it Eiver completely mes, you would have to say that that's considered a Siluk HaChayis and Sefeltish in the Siluk HaChayis. And therefore, if I would say that the Siluk HaChayis is causing, if I would say the Siluk HaChayis is causing the tumah, then I would understand why Avraham Aduldo felt in Siluk HaChayis as nishtamik. But if I say guf mes is calling it, even though I need Siluk HaChayis, I would have to conclude that the Siluk HaChayis that there is by Avraham Aduldo is enough of a Siluk HaChayis, weil das hat gemacht der Eiver in ganzen Eiver mes, then wouldn't be understood. Why is Avraham Aduldo tar? And that's what the Rebbe L'cheira Yesh Leimar is saying in the parentheses, that the first side, that the Siluk HaNeshama itself, shaft, that creates the tumah, is L'cheira coming up there, and that's what we would seem to imply from the din of Avraham Aduldo. These two Eifanim, the Rebbe brings from Milah, that by Milah I see two Eifanim to look at the mitzvah of Milah. Does the Torah want you to do a Maisa Milah? Obviously, he has to be Mohel. There's a T'nai that he has to be Mohel, but the mitzvah is to do the Maisa Milah. or is the mitzvah that he should be mol. That mitzvah of Pu'ula Samila is just the way that he should become mol is through Milah. That's the two Eitzfanim. And then the Rebbe brings this by Kisei Adam. And he explains that's the Shaila of Ishtei Shalei. So he answers, Meis metame ve'ein etziv melech metame. That was the answer of Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya. What's the answer of Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya? Says the Rebbe, he didn't answer them that it's not tamei because it's not a guf mes, second side of their chakira. He answered them regardless of whether it's a guf mes or not. There's another condition. We said there's two conditions for tumah. There's siluk haneshama. Siluk haneshama is like the spiritual cause of the tumah. There's guf mas. Guf mas is the body, is the physical thing that becomes tummy. It has to be a guf. It can't be nizbabel tzurasing. Says the Rebbe, but there's another condition. Guf mas, not the hadgasha on the word guf, not the physical properties of the thing that's becoming tummy, but it has to be something that's mes. What's something that's mes? Something that's begeder misa. Something that you could say about it life and death. And Etziv Melech doesn't die. It's not something that could be alive or dead. B'meila, even if you consider it a guf, even if it has the conditions for guf, because of that oifen that we said in the nest, in the manner of the nest, that the nest made a guf of Ishtei Shaleit into Etziv Melech, but it's not a guf that has halacha dikedinim of chayus amisa. B'meila, regardless of how you look at the two efanim and tumas mes, ken das shveren tamei, val das tamei tumas mes, because it's not begeder misa, it's not a guf mes. B'meila, says the Rebbe, their shaila is a good shaila in a sense. The two tzaddim the Rebbe makes into meir the kedakos the kechakir svaris and tumah v'tara. Why did the Gemara refer to it as divrei burus? What's the divrei burus? Because their two tzaddim are off. Their two tzaddim have nothing to do with the teretz. That's what's divrei burus. The answer to the question is not related. They're overlooking a more basic point. They're asking a very gishmak lamdishe chakira about tumas mes, about the siluk haneshama and the guf. But there's a separate din that it has to be begeder chayes umisa, and therefore it doesn't have to do with what they said, and therefore it's divrei burus. The second question that they asked, ben shunamis ma'u sheyitami. The Rebbe explains this question with a meir dikachiddush. If there's siluk haneshama, it has to become tamei. Tumas mes, as long as you have the other conditions. Now he came back to life. Why shouldn't he still be tamei? Yeah. He came back to life, but there was siluk haneshama. It's still a guf. It's still a body that has the properties of tumah and tara of a human being. Why shouldn't he become tamei? So the Rebbe says their shaila, but in the course of saying the shaila, b'seich hadvarim, the Rebbe says a chiddush, which is the yesod of the shaila. In a case where a body dies and comes back to life because the neshama that was nistalik came back, so there, for sure, it undoes the tumah. The sibas tumah was the siluk haneshama. The reversal of the sibas of the siluk haneshama, the undoing of the siluk haneshama, undoes the results of the siluk haneshama and brings back the tara that was there before the tumah. And this the Rebbe says as a davar pashat. Because of this, the Rebbe says, "La asad lave beitchias hamesim." The body is dead. The body comes back to life. When it was dead, it was tummy. Maybe it should still keep that tummy. For sure not, because there, the neshama that's coming back is the same neshama that left. So that's, whatever happened was undone. There's no trace left of that. The Rebbe compares it in the Ha'ara to Asi Dibur U'Mevatel Dibur, Asi Maisa U'Mevatel Maisa, that when the same thing that caused the damage was, same type of Pu'ula was done in reverse, then the damage is undone. What's the Shaila here? The Shaila is that by Elisha, he didn't bring back the same neshama. What was the story by Elisha with the Ben Ashunamis? It says, Vayasam piv al piv, ve'einav al einav, ve'kapav al kapav. The whole lashon is that Elisha put his face on the face of the child. He was blowing his neshama, his chayas into the child. He wasn't giving the child back his own chayas. In such a case, am I still going to say that Saf Kosaf, he got back chayas, and the siluk neshama was reversed, and it was undone, and the state of tumah that came from it is nisbatal? Or no, this is a new chayas, aber the vailas are tummy from Freer. Now he's alive, but the tumah shabai is still there. With this, the Rebbe says, I made it the answer to one of the questions. They asked the Shaila Ben Ashunamis, what's their Shaila? When there's Tchias HaMesim, does it take away the tumah, or is the tumah still there? Why are you asking by Ben Ashunamis? Ben Ashunamis wasn't the first story in Tanakh of Tchias HaMesim. The first story was with Eliyahu Navi. This Ben Ashunamis was with Elisha. With Eliyahu Navi, there was with Ben Atzarfas. The Ben Atzarfas says that was also Tchias HaMesim. Why didn't they ask about that one? Says the Rebbe, now it's understood. Again, with this you say, if the same neshama comes back, so it's as if there was no siluk neshama. Now you have to say it's not the pshat, it's as if there was no siluk neshama l'mafreya, because that won't work. But the Rebbe means, al kapanim b'negeh to mikana laba, it's as if there was no siluk neshama, and the result of the siluk neshama, which is the tumah mikana laba, is no longer there. By Ben Atzarfas, he brought back the same neshama. There, the lashon is that Eliyahu said, "Tashav na nefesh anarazeh." Let the neshama come back into the child. The neshama came back, so they didn't have a shaila. Now that the neshama came back, the cause for the tumah was reversed, as nishtam mer keninyan for tumah. By Ben Ashunamis, when he put einav aleinav piv al piv kapav al kapav, he gave his own chayos. Does the shaila, is that mevatel or is that not mevatel? Do I say this as if there's no siluk neshama? You took away the cause for tumah, or there's still a cause for tumah? And the Rebbe says again, it's divrei burus. What's the answer? He told them, meis mitame ve'en chai mitame. He said, even if you say that the siluk neshama wasn't nisbatel, you didn't take away the cause of tumah. He says, since now he's a chai, is nit mitame val chayos is mevatel un mitayr for tumas mes. Once he's alive, chayos is mitayr for tumas mes. Chayos takes away the tumah. Their shaila is, does this considered like undo chayos, so it takes away the sibas tumah? Says the Rebbe, that's divrei burus. It doesn't matter if it takes away the sibas tumah when it's a new chayas, because even if it doesn't, the state of being alive changes the tumah. It's mitar the tumah. That's the isis. Then the Rebbe says, but there's still a question. How could you say that? B'lashon hagemara tumah shebehen leheichen hoch. He was tummy before. How could he become tar now? Tumah shebehen leheichen hoch. What happened to the tumah that was there until now? And the Rebbe answers this with the Yisod of the Yalkut, that tummy meis vein meis atzmi tummy. The meis itself doesn't have a tumah. Right? That's this whole Eis test this year. L'cheira, what's the question? Again, the Rebbe seemed clearly explaining that the answer of Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya was rejecting both of the tzaddim of their chakira, not because their svaris are wrong, but because it's not negia to the shaila. Because even if you say there was no beetle of the siluk hachayis, nevertheless, akopani mikano laba, they're tar because they became star. Because chayis is mitar, that's the lashon. It's mevatel or mitar. That's the word the Rebbe sticks in over here. The chayis is a tara. If the chayis is a tara, that's mean tumish ben leichan hocha. Tumish ben leichan hocha is a question when there was nothing to take away the tumah. Here there's something to take away the tumah. There's tara. So what's the shaila? What do you have to come on to this whole next part of the pilpul that meis atzmei tumah? So l'cheira the pshat is, and we need to understand better this svara that the chayas is mad. The way it sounds b'pashtas, the Rebbe said, I don't care if the siluk hachayas was nizbatel, if the sibas atuma was undone or not, because now there's a time. It can't be. You can't say the way it sounds b'pashtas that chayas is a tara from tumah like a mikvah. Because living people could be tumas mess. That's the parsha in the Torah that we learned this week. Hanegeh b'mes v'tamei shivas yamim. Ayer is a chay. Look, chayas is mitar. Obviously, chayas is not mitar in that sense that it takes away tumas mess. Even though you could argue on this raya, and you could say maybe the vart of chayas is mitar is when there's a new chayas that wasn't there before, it's mitar. Mashenke, when he got the tumah as a chay, the chayas is not mitar, but that's not what it's mashma from the lashon. Lashon eber is a chay, is a mitam of a chay, the state of being alive, not the state of becoming alive. So what does it mean chayas is mitar? Now the Rebbe is explaining a difference. There's two things. There's tumah. Tumah as a certain mitzias, there's a certain halachadika or ruchniistika mitzias of tumah by all kinds of tumahs, including tumas mes. Tumah, when it's there, when something is imbued, it's filled with this mitzias of tumah, it needs certain kaiches to be mitar. Some things need a mikveh, some things need a for para, so everything needs whatever it needs. That without the tara, without the special means and tools of being with tara from tumah, of being oila mituma l'tara, you can never remove the tumah. And that's the question of the Gemara, tumah shebein lahechan holcha. It's gar nicht getan, ana spezielle Kula für tara geht nicht weg the tumah. And therefore, in order to say ben ashunamis is tara, says the Rebbe, is only with the yisai that ein meis atzmei tamei, that the meis doesn't have that tumah, that koyach, that mitzias of tumah. The shaila is, besides the tumah itself, there's the din tumah. There's the din of being a dover that causes tumah. A meis has a din that it's mitamei. In Gemara, if you learn in Psachim and in other places, in Saita, there's the difference between pasul and tamei. It's not a difference in how much tamei you are. The difference between pasul and tamei is pasul is something that's tamei for itself. Tamei is something that has a koyach to be mitamei other things. It's not a difference in how much tumah it has, because there's various reasons why it will be. It's a difference, there's a special din, tamei, that tamei is that koyach that Torah gives to certain things of to be mitamei something else. By tumas mes, besides the tumah, that we say the reason why a mes could be mitamei something else is not because it has tumah in it, it's exeras akasav, because main meis atzmei tamei. But Torah gave one of the things that's mitamei, a meis has the koyach of tumah, the koyach to be mitamei something else. And that's what we discuss in the whole sicha, that this tumah of tumas mes has the two criteria of siluk haneshama and guf mes. Those are the two conditions that causes it to have this din of tamei, of being something that's mitame, of being something that has a koyach to put tumah into something else. B'meila, habenzega hata shaila. Their whole shaila was about this koyach to be mitame something else that's in a mess. Now that he became back alive, because Elisha brought him back to life, do I say that the siluk hachayis was nizbatel al legabe this din tumah, not the mitzias of tumah, but that the koyach that came as a result of the siluk haneshama and the guf mess, that now it's mitame, that anyone that touches him becomes a tamei mace, becomes a avatumah. Was it batal now? Because batal asiba, batal amiseviv, or like the Rebbe says, because asi dibra mabatal dibra asi maisa mabatal maisa. And that the Rebbe says is the chiddush of the answer of Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya, that chayus is mitaher, that chayus has a koyach even if the siluk and the shama wasn't this battle, but chayus is mitame this din from koyach to put tumah into something else, even if it didn't take a chayus is mitar on her machtas oistov hamitame. Since chayus is mitar, there are shaylas divrei buras that have to do with its study. That's a cut to be mitame something else. But if I would say it has this mitzias deketuma, that's a halacha deketz hatzias. Yamnot will given the shayla saf kol saf, even though it's mitar the koyach hatuma. Because like we said, that chayas should be a tara from tumah. The person who's tumah can't become tar by the fact that he's alive, and that we need the chiddush that ein meis atzmei tamei the yalkut. Thank the Eibishter for the tape.